It might,
Yeah,
for about 30 seconds. Give you, all right, give you 30 seconds, Chris. Yeah. All right, everyone. Jerry, we all set? Great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the quarterly review meeting for the Board of Finance for the town of Fairfield. Everyone, please rise. We're going to do a Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask Jim Brown to lead us in the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I think it appropriate that we hold a moment of silence. We lost a former police chief for the town who I did not happen to know all that well, but I think in his memory, we should hold a moment of silence, not only for him, but also for all of our emergency services personnel. So. Thank you very much. All right. Tonight, the state of play for our quarterly meeting, we're going to hear a report from the Fairfield Theater Company. We're going to review the third quarter financial report from the Board of Education. We were going to hear a report from the Director of Public Works on an updated facilities plan. However, he had a scheduling conflict come up for personal reasons and is unable to attend that, so we're going to push that off to a date certain. We're going to review the third quarter financial and seasonality report for the town, and then we're going to hear a brief discussion on the current status of the town's pension plans as of the end of the last fiscal quarter, March 31st. A couple of programming notes. Mr. Brockfeld had to be away on business this evening. Mr. Bolito had a family conflict early in the meeting, should join us a little bit later. And Mrs. Leclerc also had a family conflict and will not be joining us tonight. I did not hear from Mr. Stone, so I expect he may still join us. With that, item number one on our agenda is the Fairfield Theater Company presentation. We have Mr. Reed here from the Fairfield Theater Company. We'd like to welcome him to the board. You'll all remember that the Fairfield Theater Company became a topic of discussion during our budget deliberations, where there was a realization that there were some electrical charges, utility charges paid for by the town on behalf of the Fairfield Theater Company for the building that the Fairfield Theater Company was in. There was also some question as to monies owed from the Fairfield Theater Company to the town through that lease agreement. Those monies have, I guess, Mr. Hiller, been paid up to through which?
Current through March 31st.
Current through March 31st. So with all the discussion and the conversation and the press coverage, it was thought that we'd have the Fairfield Theater Company come on in and represent themselves and speak to us.
Mr. Chairman, can I make one comment on,
Please.
Particularly relating back to the budgetary discussions that were held? As you know, originally in the original budget document, the budget for Fairfield Theater Company was put in the what I'll call private agencies section. Some $39,000 split between the electricity and the heating costs. This board made the decision to take that money out, and we had created two separate accounts within the Public Works budget, which in the rush to get a budget done, we never funded. So we took it out of the private agency department and never put it into the Public Works department under separate lines.
Oh, that's why. Okay, so this could be a short presentation. No, I'm kidding.
Turn out the lights, I guess you might call it.
Okay.
And there you go.
Just leave the keys on the table.
There you go. And so Mr. White has in essence appealed the decision of the Board of Finance. It's kind of a friendly challenge to the decision of the Board of Finance.
So in some, within the course of the 40-odd votes or whatever it was that we took that night,
Right. We meant
to transfer those funds.
We cut it out of the private agencies. We never put it back into the Public Works budget. So there is an appeal pending which will be heard this coming Monday night before the
Yeah.
Board
I
of
blame
Finance,
Mrs.
before the
Donovan.
RTM on that basis.
Okay, so that, I think she just said it's coming out of the Finance Department budget.
Right. Well, we got an extra 500,000 in there, so.
All right. With that, gentlemen, please introduce yourselves and welcome.
Thank you so much, and I'll ask if we can get this projector turned on.
Oh, you, no, that's.
They put that out, they,
Well, introduce yourself.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the agenda this evening. I know you have a lot of important business, and we'll just take a few minutes. My name is John Reed. I'm the Executive Director of Fairfield Theater Company, and I have been with the organization about 2.5 months. I'm a resident of the town of Fairfield. I've lived here for about 2 years, and my wife and daughter. And I'd also like to introduce Ira Platt, who's the chairman of the board, recently elected. And I believe Mr. Platt is known to some of you. And I thought it would be helpful. One thing that became clear to me is that we could do a better job in communicating who the Fairfield Theater Company is and what we do to the town of Fairfield and to the citizens. And so with that, I prepared a very brief PowerPoint presentation I'd like to take you through. Unfortunately, about half of it is in the middle of your head right now,
There
Mr.
you
Flynn,
go.
but I will...
Only half? I have a pretty big head.
I'd also like to acknowledge that several of our board members are also here in the meeting in the back, and as a show of moral support, I think they're ready to throw me a lifeline if I get in trouble here. But I think many of you know the FTC is located right across from the train station at 70 Sanford Street. I'll take you a little bit through our history of who we are. We are a not-for-profit center for the arts located right in the center of downtown Fairfield. At that Sanford Street location, we have a 225-seat theater where we have 3 to 4 shows a week. We also produce 15 to 20 shows a year at the Klein Auditorium, which is right down the road in Bridgeport. We have been widely recognized for enriching the community of Fairfield through music, theater, visual arts, educational workshops, and our mission, simply stated, is to encourage people to come together and experience the arts. Our motto, get out, come together. Little history, we began in that space with a focus on theatrical plays, chamber music, and such. Our membership grew to about 1,800 members, and we had about 3,000 patrons, but we found that that type of programming was not financially sustainable. And even though, artistically, from what I understand, I wasn't here, there were many who appreciated it from an artistic perspective, but it was clear that it wasn't sustainable financially. And so those who were here at the time developed a more mainstream approach to musical programming to build an audience, and they began to bring popular artists in a variety of popular music, folk, rhythm and blues, rock, jazz, which created quite a loyal following and quite a lot of buzz in the area. The patron base over about the 4-year period expanded to 20,000 people, mostly in Fairfield County, but also throughout the region into the Northeast. And then we expanded programming to include music education, theater workshops for children, and last but not least, we did survive the serious economic downturn. Today, we produce about 175 plus events a year with primarily nationally, internationally renowned artists, although I should say a lot of local artists also who are, I would say, up and coming, who are openers for some of the more national acts. We have about 35,000 patrons that attend our events every year. And I should say of those 35,000 patrons, 20,000 of those patrons or more come to 70 Sanford Street to hear shows. So these are people that come to the theater 3 to 4 times a week. We have 13,000 Facebook friends. That's growing daily. You probably know the importance of that from a marketing perspective. And we have become, as I say, endorsed to the Fairfield Weekly Readers Poll. This is the 4th year in a row that we've been selected in Fairfield County as the best place to hear a concert. There are a lot of other performing arts venues, but this FTC has consistently been selected by the readers. We also support a lot of local nonprofits who hold fundraisers at Stage 1. We help often to produce those fundraisers or to provide the venue for them. I'll get into some of the specifics, but we partner with local restaurants and businesses, both to increase their patronage, and they also help us by talking about FTC, and many of the local businesses or local restaurants, if you go for a meal, they will hand you a calendar of our events with a check, just as a way of showing their support. We list them on our website so that we can drive business and traffic to their businesses for people who are coming to the shows. The feedback that we get from local owners of restaurants, et cetera, is very positive in terms of the impact that we've had, and many have credited anecdotally FTC with having a huge part to play in the economic revival in downtown Fairfield. And if you go out there, I was out Saturday night, and I mean, it was amazing. It was a nice night, but how many people were out and about, not just at FTC. Other programming, and I say current and future because some of this is aspirational, but we are looking at some film series. We have a summer cabaret workshop for children, which is a theater workshop. We have our Saturday morning kids program where we have children from the local high schools here in Fairfield who mentor children from surrounding communities in music education. We're also in the process of bringing an art gallery into the space that was formerly occupied by the Fairfield Arts Council. Our patrons, I think it's interesting to understand who comes to our shows, because our patrons actually are a slice of Fairfield County. If you look at this, these are affluent heads of households with an annual income of $250,000 or more. They're well-traveled, well-educated, well-dressed, and in support of our restaurants, they're well-fed. They dine out at least once a week. And our patrons, this came from a Nielsen survey that was done for us a couple of years ago, and Nielsen has a number of lifestyle groups or life stage groups that they identify. And we were in the our top 5 groups were of the top 6 in Nielsen, which basically says that the people who come to our shows, like the people who live in Fairfield County and the people who live in the town of Fairfield, are affluent, those who have accumulated wealth, they're well educated, they're people who we like to see, who the merchants like to see come as patrons to their stores and shops, et cetera. And I say this a little bit to say we also have, I'll say, multi-generational crowds. I've seen parents and children. I've seen, I think, grandparents and grandchildren come to shows. And so it is while it's not a particularly youth-oriented venue, we do have a lot of young people that come as well. Financial information, as this is a Finance Committee meeting, I think you probably know the town of Fairfield receives $2 for every ticket sold. Right now, that's about a run rate of about $38,000 a year based on the number of tickets we sell at Stage 1. We have spent about $900,000 as a tenant in tenant improvements, fixtures and equipment for the theater. 55+%, and it varies a little bit from year to year, is generated through ticket sales and concessions. The remainder is through donations, membership, sponsorships. This is not-for-profit. We absolutely rely on the donations of the community. I have to say that our FTC board members have consistently supported the organization generously, and frankly, when I had that little slide about surviving the economic hard times, economic downturn, that was primarily because of our board members. Number of foundations, local businesses, corporations, individuals, and we also do events such as a half marathon that we're entering this year here in Fairfield, a golf tournament, and other types of fundraisers. Like most not-for-profit organizations, we are always living on, arts organizations living on a very thin margin. I personally have been working in the nonprofit sector for 30 years in a number of organizations. And I've worked for organizations with operating budgets in excess of $1 billion, and I've worked in organizations the size of Fairfield Theater Company. I'll tell you that they're always living close to the bone, if you will, and always a close margin. A look at some of our donors and sponsors so you get an idea of who supports us, all the way from local businesses to charitable foundations, family foundations. Our restaurant partners, this is a partial list, and I say partial list because it grows daily, but many of these are the restaurants that many of are within a few block radius, but some a little further out. And I think that if you talk to any of these restaurant owners and ask them about FTC, they will tell you that we bring significant value to the community and their businesses because of the 20,000 plus patrons that we bring through the doors in Fairfield, not to mention the 15,000 or so that come to see us at the Klein in Bridgeport. We also do a number of nonprofit fundraisers. Now, when I started this, I thought we could do a lot of pictures of kids, of music and such, but because this was Finance Committee meeting, we went a little the other way. But this is a snapshot from a fundraiser that we did. And we help a number of local charities raise money for their causes through, as I say, using the venue to stage events, for helping produce some of the fundraisers. Closing thoughts. Fairfield Theater Company truly appreciates the relationship with the town of Fairfield. And although I'm new to the organization, I'm committed to making sure that we express that and we communicate that. And we believe that this is a public-private partnership. I've talked about my nonprofit experience. I've worked in a number of public-private partnerships. I think this is a model program because the value that is being derived here in the community because of the patronage, because of the arts, it's really interesting to see. And some of you may know about the creative placemaking move at the state level with the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, but there is a strong move nationally to realizing that the arts in a community really is the rising tide that lifts all boats, that it brings value to the community, it brings values to the business. It's not just the esoteric value of enjoying arts, but it's the value of bringing patrons who are willing to, someone comes to a show at FTC, typically they're going to go out for dinner before they come, or they're going to go out for a bite afterwards. We are committed to increase the breadth of our programs, and I mean genres of programs, as we are more successful with the programs that are economically viable. We'd like to be able to invest in programs such as classical music, more jazz, things like that, children's programs that can't stand on their own financially. And finally, we would just encourage all of you, please come see a show if you haven't, and help us to encourage Fairfield to get out and come together, which is our motto, so that together we can enjoy this rich cultural experience of arts right here in the middle of Fairfield. Thank you very much.
Great. Can we
Let me
turn that off
put this down.
if we can? Oh, excellent. Thank you.
I think you'll have a
No,
little
it's
bit
not
of
in the
blue
middle
on
of
you.
my forehead. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for the service you're providing to the community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to board members who may or may not have some questions on the presentation. Yeah, Mr. Brown.
Yes, and thanks for the presentation, and like you said, it's a finance meeting, so I'll just keep the questions to finance, although I would have more on what you do, but maybe at another time.
Sure.
But what is your annual budget? Did I miss that?
It's about $2.7 million is our annual operating budget.
Okay. And you say you have a thin margin, but in the end, you're profitable?
In the end, I would say right now we are, if everything goes well, we may break even this year. So profitability, last year, where did we end up?
We
with?
lost money in the last fiscal year, which ended June 30th,
I think we lost about
2011.
$80,000, is that correct? Yeah.
80.
$80,000 last year. Yes.
Okay, and what is your fiscal year?
It's a June 30th to June.
Same, okay. Okay. So how about this year? Is that when you're going to lose 80 this fiscal year?
We're probably along the same lines right now.
So what are you going to do to change that? I'm sure that's not the goal, right? What is the goal?
Well, I think the first goal that we have really is continued sustainability. We talk about that often. We are spending a good deal of time and effort in building a budget that meets that goal. We're reliant on, as John said, our sources of revenue are the events that we put on, some rental income, membership, sponsorship, and donations. And we've been overly reliant on donations. We still need to grow that side of the business, but we need to grow membership and sponsorship aggressively as well. And I'd say that's the hope, is that we can do that to fill that hole through the growth of those areas.
I would say the long-term financial goal for an organization this size is that you'd like to see about a 5% profitability per year in that range, which gives you, and in the nonprofit world, profitability really is money to invest in programs and to invest in sustainability.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Just a couple quick questions on the financial slides. I think you said you do 3-4 shows a week.
Yes, sir.
Up to 225 people per show. Obviously, they're not all full. Are all those shows Stage 1 shows that are ticket eligible for the town of Fairfield, or does that include everything? And can you walk me through quickly, what that calculation is and how many of those particular shows you do in a given year, which translates to the $2 per ticket revenue for the town?
So typically, and it's, the math's fairly simple, any show that Fairfield Theater Company produces and derives ticket revenue from, the town of Fairfield receives $2 for every paid ticket, and that $38,000 is basically 19,000 tickets sold. If we host a fundraiser, we're not getting ticket revenue from that, so those shows, that would be a third-party not-for-profit. So essentially, those 3 to 4 shows a week. My aspirational goal, as I say, I've been here a couple of months, so it's still good to dream, but my aspirational goal is that we would produce about 4 shows per week, or roughly 200 shows per year at Stage 1 here in Fairfield.
Okay. And those would be ticket eligible
Those would be
shows.
ticket eligible. And the occupancy rate has run, in previous years, has run an average of 65 to 70%, meaning the number of tickets sold to capacity. We've done a little better. The first quarter of this year, it's been in about 80 to 81%, so we're seeing a little bit of an upturn. We hope that that's a sign of a uptick in the economy. And so clearly, the more seats we sell, the more shows we do, the more revenue comes back to the town.
Okay. And my last question is, for the current year that ends on June 30th in a few months, what will the ticket revenue to the town be estimated to?
I think
The ticket revenue to the town is actually the greater of the appraised value, the tax appraisal for the property that we lease from you, and the $2 per paying patron fee. It's quite likely that those two numbers will be very much on top of each other this year with the occupancy rate that we've been experiencing through the first quarter.
at about $40,000 for the year.
Roughly 20,000 tickets over 52
Roughly
weeks?
20,000
And that's
tickets.
roughly
Yes, and
that's roughly the appraised value? Can you walk me through that?
So
That's
the town of Fairfield, the property has an assessment each year, and there's a tax assessment. It's the opportunity cost, essentially, of those taxes. And so we are, under the terms of the lease, we're required to pay the greater of
Those two
the per
figures.
ticket cost, or and to date, as we've looked back, they've run, the per ticket cost has been higher, but most recently, there was a significant increase in the assessment this year. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was a fairly significant
So
increase.
roughly 40K for the year.
Roughly
And
40K.
Mr. Hiller mentioned that as of March 31st, all past payments are up to date?
That's correct.
That's correct.
That's through the
We
previous quarter,
received a check
though, right?
within the last 10 days, I think it was, for in excess of $11,000. We had previously, group had come current with a check of just under 17,000, I believe it was 16,000.
Through the end of the, yes, we pay on a
Something
quarterly
like that. So-
basis.
So there has been revenue in the 28,000 range that has been received at this time.
Right. I mean, without getting into the weeds too much, the payment that was recently received, does that make you physically current through December or through March?
No,
Through
through
March
March.
31st.
Through March, okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. DeWitt?
Good evening.
Good evening.
First off, thank you very much. I've seen some great shows at the Klein, really great shows.
Have 4 coming up. We'd be happy to save some tickets right now.
Oh, yeah. I saw,
I'd like you to go to the FTC so we could actually get some revenue off
all right, I'll do both. I'll do both. I saw Zappa Does Zappa at the Klein. It was fantastic, absolutely good. Is it just a coincidence, Mr. Hiller, that our $39,000 budget mirrors that $40,000?
I
Commitment,
think
if
that's
you
a
will?
coincidence. I think we had never, until perhaps last fall, and the first selectman can correct me, the Public Works Department tracks each building.
Right.
But in the Public Works budget, all buildings, whether it's the library, the police department, the fire station, town hall, for utility purpose, they're all put in there. When we were starting our early deliberations on the budget last October, November, we said, the question I think the first selectman brought up is, what is it really costing us just, in what we could easily identify?
Right.
And those were the past numbers. Now, I remind you that, as you've seen before, our electricity costs have gone down
Right.
fairly significantly. And so that number was the past year's experience.
Okay. No, because there was a desire from this board to know about rental properties. I think that's what the first selectman
Right.
worked on. So it's fair to say that you're basically covering your own utilities. That's really all we're expecting of the Fairfield Theater Company.
Clearly, I think this year with that number, and, the cost of electricity, as I just said, is going to be less, and we've had a warm winter, so.
Yeah, so we'll make up. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Gaffney, anything? No. A couple questions for myself. And forgive the naiveness of this first question. So you have a $2.7 million budget, of which about 55% is ticket sales, which is about $1.4 million. I was trying to break down what your P&L might look like, what your largest expenses are. Is the 2.7, does out of that come your cost for the entertainers?
Yes,
Okay,
that is.
so that's a gross number.
That is the largest expense, yes.
That is the largest. So I would assume that's the largest, and then what's next? Salaries?
Staff, we have 10 full-time employees and 19 part-time employees, and the part-time employees would be light and sound, working anywhere from 10 to 30 hours a week.
Okay, so it's the performance costs, and then it's the personnel costs. Does your operating budget include, you spoke about the $900,000 that's been invested within the property. Is that a separate fund, or does that also come out of your general fund or your operating fund?
So those monies were spent I believe, out of operating funds in the past, and so now today it's depreciated on our balance sheet. It's a depreciating asset on the balance sheet.
But do you guys do, some of your fundraising is the 2.7, I serve on the board of a not-for-profit, and we try to break it into, the operating funds and then actually the capital improvements, the capital campaigns. Is it one fund or is it all?
So today, we don't have any specific funds set aside for capital improvements, and so all funds really could be characterized as operating funds in that illustration.
So if there was a problem with the building or something, it could cause an issue for you in an
Certainly.
expenditure of funds
Absolutely.
within the building. Has that happened at all?
Well, I'm too new to tell you that.
We've had some issues, but we've been able to maintain the building as needed. The costs we have not had any catastrophic issues, which you're, alluding to,
Right.
to date.
Yeah, but it's a flat roof building and stuff like that, right? Paul, has the town spent any money on that roof, or have we done anything?
We
with it?
have spent some money as far as maintenance. We were able to get a steep grant to replace the roof a few years ago. So there was some state commitment, and also to redo the parking lot and kind of a beautification program, which ties in also to the rail station.
Okay, so that was done through grants as well?
That was done through grants, primarily a steep program through the state of Connecticut.
Okay. Okay.
And I should add this, we have been able to identify some costs, I don't have them here, that our Public Works Department, as far as certain maintenance projects might be.
Okay, so Public Works does provide some upkeep and care of the building, so if you guys have a mechanical issue with the building that's not, I would assume, not related to like light or sound or stage, you actually call DPW and they would come in and take care of the work there?
That is correct. Other than basic maintenance and cleaning, et cetera, that is correct.
Okay. All right. All right. So the actual operating costs are probably more than the 2.7.
They would be, yeah.
Yeah, because there's
I
the
mean,
payment in
the
kind.
utility costs are those that are clearly easily identified because they're
Right.
separate and distinct accounts
Right,
for gas and/or electricity.
right. Okay. What's, curious, what's the average, if you had to average the ticket prices, Do you have an average ticket price for the events there?
There's a significant range. While the average is probably about $35,
Okay.
we generally try to provide programming to meet a variety of patrons' needs, right?
Sure.
We have some, younger patrons, so we try and do series of shows at $20 or $18 or $15, as well as then we're bringing in some, higher grade brand name, if you will, talent.
Yeah,
where
there
the
was
ta-
one that was there, it was like $100 or $85.
John Mayall was a $100 ticket this spring. Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I knew it was a rather broad question. I'm just trying to, what it goes back to what I was thinking of was the demographics that you were talking about of your patrons. Because obviously what we get questioned all the time is the people that aren't part of that demographic that still live in town and how do they benefit and all that. And I think you make a compelling case. Don't read into my comments
Sure.
related to what you do for the merchants and what you do for the other not-for-profits. But obviously, that's a question that we get asked repeatedly.
I would say that probably as much as a third of our shows are, sub-$25 tickets.
Yeah. So some of them have to be, okay.
And I'd also say it's true that to some degree, those shows we're subsidizing with the shows with a higher ticket price because they tend, some of those shows don't break even, but we believe programmatically it's the right thing to do.
Right. And so but you have a good working relationship with the merchants downtown,
That's
and with the restaurants, and they're supportive of your efforts, and you're also facilitating business for them.
We do, and in fact, many of the restaurants, for example, will sponsor a show, and they'll do an evening where they'll have friends and customers. But we have a very, very good, close relationship. We have a route where each month we distribute menus, we speak to the restaurateurs, and they're very supportive because, again, these 20,000 people that are coming for entertainment would be going somewhere if they weren't coming here. And,
Right. Right. Great. So can you move more of the 15,000 from the Klein back to the FTC, or what?
We would love to do that, and it would ultimately depend on, as you may know, there's a large undeveloped warehouse space next to us that has a square footage. Unfortunately, today it has no sprinkler or no HVAC in it, but if that step were taken, it's possible that venue, that we could build a venue that would hold up to 500 people. And if that were the case, we could potentially double the number of patrons that come into this, that come through the doors at FTC. That would take a significant capital campaign on our part, and I believe probably an investment from the town, because it is, it's great as a warehouse as long as you don't need heating, cooling, or sprinkler. But
Okay, great. Any other questions from board members? Gentlemen, well, first of all, I want to go to the public. Does the public have any comments? I see Mr. Tetra raised his hand.
Steal your mic, please. No, just to kind of add 2 points. One is that, especially with the focus on arts downtown, with both the community theater issue and the Fairfield Arts Center having their struggles, as I get out and talk to more people about the downtown, the arts, what's taken place, time and again, I'm reminded, and it's pointed out to me, how many folks go downtown, eat in the theaters, and go to the theater company or participated in their shows and programs.
Eat in the restaurants, right?
Eat at the restaurants, sorry about that. I think the other point is when we got a group of the leaders in the arts community together, we focused on kind of what we can do better downtown and what Fairfield needs to do for its role in the arts. And there were 2 terms that came out. The first one was sustainability, and you've heard that here tonight. What do we have to do to make it sustainable? That kind of evolved into another term, which I think is more important and more to the point, which is making it vital. And I think what the theater company's done is make their programming a vital part of our downtown experience. And I think that is really where we need to get to with other arts programs in downtown to build on Fairfield into the arts and culture center and keep it alive and well and keep our vibrant downtown going. There's no magic. I mean, you go to the restaurants, you see people eating outside, you feel the energy. Certainly the theater company is a big part of that.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you for coming in tonight. We wish you good
Thank you
luck.
very much for your time.
Enjoy the rest of your season. Look forward to being a patron. All right. Yeah, exactly. Can you bring Bruce Springsteen down? Yes, 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 yes.
We'll take that under advisement.
Yeah. All right.
I prefer a clap.
Yeah. No taste. All right. Item number 2, review of the third quarter financial report for the Board of Education. Mr.
We distributed with the call three separate documents. First off, I had a conversation yesterday with Dr. Title, who is, as we speak, 100 or so feet down the hallway in an executive session with the Board of Education. And he personally had opted to give Mrs. Munsell the night off because she was involved in meetings last night and tomorrow night. And I think the report is self-explanatory. They are confident, barring any dramatic changes, that they will finish the year in the black. A lot of that really comes about as a result of the significant savings, which we are starting to achieve, or have started to achieve, in the utility accounts. As I mentioned, with the theater company, with the favorable rates which we were able to negotiate, which began January 1st, and also the mild winter. They've had a couple of operational situations, particularly with the boiler at Fairfield High School, Fairfield Ward High School, and some other additional school transportation charges.
Mr. Hiller, on the, one of the items that was noted in the write-up, and forgive me, everybody, I don't know if you had the same question, was something with a wall in a gymnasium at Fairfield.
I noticed that, and I'm not particularly familiar with that personally. I don't know,
First Selectman, do you know anything about that? Anybody? Yeah, it's the first I read about it.
yeah, I believe it's a,
Yeah.
They did discuss it at the Board of Ed meeting, whatever, 2 weeks ago. Had something to do with the internal construction of the wall and how, with the changes in the weather, it wasn't,
Was this part of the renovation, do you know?
no. They said it was the original wall in the gym.
Can we get a little bit more
I'll speak to
background
Mr.
on that?
Cullen and Mr. Morabito, and I'll get back to the board as far as the
Yeah, they
specifics on
clarified it that night
Yeah,
at the Board of Ed meeting.
okay. Thank you, Mrs. Catlin. And if we could follow up and get more detail, that'd be great. Okay. Any other questions on this report? It was a relatively thorough Board of Education report. Yeah, Mr. Brown?
Quick question about at the end of the fiscal year, they're going to finish in the black, they feel? Do you have anything more specific than that?
The specifics are that, first off, as I indicated to this board, I guess it's now last month, at the last budget scene, the board has already indicated that they will be returning a fairly significant amount of unused purchase orders from the prior fiscal year. As you know, this board encumbers funds, and in the case of the Board of Education, that has always been a fairly hefty number. In conversations with both Dr. Title and Mrs. Munsell, that's a practice which I think they intend to significantly change under their leadership. That they have already indicated that that number is going to be in excess of $100,000. And that has nothing to do with this year's operating budget. I think the request for, which we won't see probably until August or September for purchase orders, will be significantly reduced, but that only will impact our encumbrances on the current year. I think, you know, that Dr. Title is very confident of savings. I think he's concerned about, you know, keeping the budget intact, or the proposed budget for fiscal 13 intact through the RTM process, obviously.
So the savings is coming from last year's budget?
Well, I think there's two categories of savings. There's identified savings right now, which are in excess of $100,000, and that's on purchase orders for goods and services which will not be used. And that they've pretty well identified. What they haven't identified fully at this point in time are what the savings are going to be on this year's budget, but barring, and with, what do we got? We got about 10 weeks to go, let's say, in the fiscal year. They seem confident that they've got their costs within control and are going to be, and intend to be able to return funds to the town.
Any other questions from board members? Mr. DeWitt?
Just a clarification, maybe I wasn't listening too intently. You said that they're going to have a new policy. Did you mean that they're no longer, they're going to encumber their own
No,
previous
they have
year
to come
debts
here,
and-
they have to come here, but I think in the past, there's been, that number has gotten up in the, well over $1 million.
Yeah.
Dr. Title's own personal philosophy is, and a lot of times, those purchase orders have frankly just lingered out there for a lengthy period
Yeah,
of time.
we've had that discussion before. Right?
And we always knew, and when I reached out back in late March to the Board of Education, we always knew, for example, last year, and don't hold me exactly to the figure, but we got back $30,000, let's say, of purchase orders. I went to the accounting supervisor to get a number as to if they had any indication as to what they have. And frankly, I was surprised, because usually we didn't get those numbers until, at the best, until late June. And so I thought the answer was going to be, which I've heard in past years, call us up in late June. But they identified, and then I verified that with Mrs. Munsell and Dr. Title, in excess of $100,000 of old purchase orders which are gone. So that's money that is basically, if we close the books tonight, that's money that would drop to our bottom line immediately, because, when you go to our audit report, it's in there as a, or what's under the new terminology called assigned, or reserved, and it's in there. So we're $100,000 better right now as a result of that. The second category is really on this year's operating budget, and where are they there? And obviously, things can happen, and we've all seen them happen. It's unlikely that they're going to blow up another boiler, because they're not under stress at this time of the year on that. But barring any other, mechanical emergencies that they may happen in any of the buildings, they're very, they know what their transportation costs are, they know what their personnel costs are. As this board's aware, they did have a bad run on insurance, particularly in the months of January and February. That had some fairly good improvement in the month of March, which we've just been able to
Well,
identify.
But I guess what I was really getting at was, I think what you're saying, Dr. Title is saying, is that his philosophy is spend the money in the year that he's got the money,
That's right.
and we're not going to see these windfalls anymore. Next year, we should not be looking for a big windfall
You're
from
not-
old POs.
I think
from the
that
Board of
that's
Ed,
clear.
right?
In other words, don't count on getting in
Right.
excess of
This is it.
$100,000. Because as his statement to me was, he said, if I can't get material or services from the previous year by August, in other words,
Right.
60 days later, he said, it's gone. And I think that's the attitude that he's taken, that
Right.
if you're a supplier and you can't deliver material, books, paper, whatever, if you can't deliver it by August 31st,
Especially
you
with
don't
our
have
new
that
purchasing
order anymore.
policies, right?
And so I think what you're going to see is going to be, but this is, again, to your point, Chris, I think this is in a sense, a significant windfall to us, as I say, in excess of $100,000. And that number may grow from there a little bit. It's not going to go below that, because it's, they're able to identify it and they're able to quantify it.
Okay. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3. Now, item number 3 on the agenda was to hear a report from the Director of Public Works on the updated facilities plan. Mr. White had a conflict come up at the last second, a personal conflict, is out of town and unable to be here. With that being the case, I'd like to move that we postpone this item, which was an informational item only at this point, to the next quarterly meeting, which would be July. And that'll be more than enough time to be prepared for our capital planning summit, which is in the early fall. Sure. And it'll be fresher in our minds. So I'd like to move that we move this to date certain, which would be our July quarterly meeting. Do you have the date, Paul? Do I need to say that in the motion?
It would be the fourth Tuesday in July, which I believe is the 24th. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty good, guys. Okay. So I'm going to move that we move this to our next quarterly meeting, which is the fourth Tuesday in July, which we believe to be the 24th. And it is the 24th.
I did the quick arithmetic on that. 4th of July is a Wednesday this year, that I know.
That's it. So Paul knows the holidays, and that's he was able to back into it. I get it.
Got to pay for the
So
fireworks.
I'll make that motion. Do we have a second? Well, second by Mr. Bolito. All in favor? Those opposed, abstentions, that item is carried forward to the July quarterly review meeting. Wow, okay. Item number 4, to review the third quarter financial and seasonality report for the town. So that was, I believe, in packages. Questions, comments on this report?
You don't have to have I left my printer. I know we're not supposed to be having it.
Which ones?
Just the third quarter meeting.
These are the Munis reports. Do you want that? Or?
Yeah, that would be great, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if others had this issue, just
Did anyone else?
logistically.
Mr. Flynn apparently had a no.
I had an email problem where I only got 3 of the
I got
attachments.
3.
You got 3, you didn't get 11.
I had 11.
No.
I think there were 10.
10?
I think there were 10.
11.
No, I didn't get
I got 3. And you had 3 as well?
Yeah, I think I got them all. If you want to look, I think I have them all.
Yeah, so that was a problem, so,
We'll blame it on Linda again.
Linda's fault again.
okay.
The mayor report.
Maybe the
Mayor
files are too
report.
big or
We
something.
called the mayor
So with that in
report.
mind, that this might get a little bit,
It's not on what I copied. You have.
Okay, I can give you the one copy I have if Chris needs it, but I won't have a copy this week if he asks, but I'll just.
No, I'm fine. This is, just make it up.
all right.
If we go to the narrative, we continue to project a surplus for the current year in the neighborhood of $1.5 million, which we talked about some 4 weeks, I guess it's 4 weeks ago now. And there are what I would call some highlights and lowlights as far as that's concerned. Couple of things have happened. We just also addressed as part of that what is going to be the stuff from previous year relating to the Board of Education. That number would be included in there. It does not, that $1.5 million number does not include any potential savings within the current year's Board of Education accounts. It does include approximately $100,000 in the private school transportation, for which the Board of Ed is responsible for the administration of that account, though it's a town-side account. If we want to look first at revenue, first off, I should add this, and there hasn't been an official announcement, but we have hired a new tax collector. And hopefully, 2 weeks from tonight, when the board comes, we've hired Cinda Buchter, who most recently, or still is the tax collector for the town of Derby, has been in that position for 10 or 11 years, is the incoming president of the Connecticut State Tax Collectors Association, and comes highly recommended, passed all interviews, both with the committee, with Mrs. Mariles and myself, and Mrs. Bossi, and Mr. Gorzolani. Also additionally met, as did other candidates, with the first selectman and his chief of staff, Mr. Mayor. And so she has started on a part-time basis, 2 days a week, for the past 2 weeks, and that will continue for the next 2 weeks. And she will officially start full-time on May 7th, 2 weeks from yesterday. So we're very pleased that we have a very, very adequate replacement for Mr. Gorzolani. And obviously, one of the difficulties right now is, not difficulties, but we are in a collection month, which ends next Tuesday. However, we are seeing significant improvement in prior year taxes and in interest on taxes, and are able to feel that those numbers are already over budget, and obviously that will continue to go over budget. And we are pursuing, as you've probably read in the paper, a tax sale, which is something that this town has never done, and have had reasonably good success in collecting from our major delinquents, which were categorized into 2 categories: individuals who owed in excess of $50,000, and corporations or LLCs or LLPs or anything of the sort that owed in excess of $20,000. We've had great success with that to date. Obviously, we haven't collected everything as far as that's concerned, but I think it has accelerated our delinquent tax picture, and there is great improvement there. Additionally, in the highlights in the narrative, the town clerk's revenue, we feel, is going to exceed our budgetary estimates. The golf course has obviously had, up until Sunday, a very good spring, and the shortfall that was there essentially for the 2011 portion of the fiscal year has been eliminated, essentially. And obviously, in the next 9 to 10 weeks, that's going to be weather-driven, but we've been very fortunate as far as that's concerned. On the downside, building permits, we anticipate, are going to be significantly under budget. There are several projects that are potentially out there, but there has not been, we haven't seen the revenue yet. We're zoning and conservation hurdles have been crossed, and we're just waiting for people to come in and say, we're ready to put the shovel in the ground. That has not happened yet, and so we anticipate a significant shortfall there. We do anticipate, on the state revenue side, shortfalls just under $100,000 in state revenue. And on our ECS grant, the audit for the excess special ed cost will reduce our our excess cost, our ECS grant, by approximately $25,000. That's a balancing act that some years we win on it, some years we lose on it. We're scheduled to get $3,590,000 from the state. Once the audit is done on the excess costs, which has been completed, we get notified that we're 25,000 under, and the town has to swallow that. So that's a pretty much final number, and we will we will receive that money from the state next Monday night by transfer. Questions on revenues?
Mr. Belita?
Thank you. I apologize for being late, as you were missing the left side of the infield tonight, so I don't feel too bad. You mentioned the building permits, that you have several major projects that are kind of out there, but they haven't put the shovel in the ground. Could you just elaborate on what those projects are looking like, what they are specifically?
The two biggest ones that I can think of off the top of my head, which are fully permitted, are the new business school at Sacred Heart University, the corner of Jefferson and Park, and Black Rock Congregational Church. And those are the two big ones that.
What about the Metro Center? I know that they got some zoning approval for the revamped atrium in the building. Where do we stand with that?
Nothing known at this time.
Okay.
Nothing specific. And I certainly don't think, even if we got a call tomorrow morning, when you look at it as far as the process on that, it would, even if, as I say, if we got a call tomorrow morning that Mr. Whittick had a tenant that, and everything was resolved, that the likelihood of those permit dollars being received within this fiscal year would be unlikely.
Okay, so it's down the road a ways, we're hoping,
correct.
but nothing definite, right? Now, as to the ECS grant, just probably comment more than anything, the state mandates that we do certain things with regard to special education, and then we don't get the full amount of funding we're expecting. I mean, how does that work? Is it just strictly a formulaic thing? It just seems like, again, an unfunded mandate.
It's a balance. We, over the years, probably on the excess cost grant, have made money on it. And my argument has been is that, frankly, that a lot of those costs should be within the operating budget, and they're not. They're kind of an offline situation.
Right.
And we don't count the excess cost grants, which are significant. They're probably this year in the neighborhood of $2.75 million that the Board of Education receives, and it's for specific children, obviously. It's not for a program or something like that. And over the years, as a result of audit, we're not probably, we clearly are a net winner on that, as opposed, because you see, and here I think where there's kind of a dual standard for the state. They give the primary grant, the 2 3/4, to the Board of Education. Once it goes through audit, and the audit's on last year's money, not the current year's
Right.
money.
Okay.
It's on last year's money. When there's a variance, it's on the town's ticket, let's say. And so this year, we're going to be short $250,000, added a zero there, $25,000. Last year, and don't hold me exactly to the figure, we were a net winner. We picked up $78,000. And I think that this, it's still money for the town of Fairfield, I realize. But unfortunately, as far as the general fund is concerned, we take a $25,000 hit on a revenue line, which, we think is one of the more solid revenue lines, and that's the ECS grant. You look at the governor's budget, which, and that which has come out of the Appropriations Committee, that $2,590,000 figure is constant. It has been for the last 2 or 3 years. It is for this year and next year, and, we lose on it.
Going forward, does the Board of Ed have any inclination to, as you mentioned, start putting this as an operating item, and as far as the grant that comes in from the state, whatever we get, consider it a bonus?
I don't believe so, and I think there are some, the state basically mandates that this is the way it goes, that it's out there as a separate account. Obviously, it's audited, clearly it's audited, because this $25,000 reduction is clearly a result of that audit. But it's what I would call an off-budget item. As many of the Title I, there's several, the IDEA grants, which are the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA grants, the Perkins grants, all of these things which come through the federal thing, which this board sees in a one-page document in their budget book or in the federal single audit at the time the audit is presented.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on revenue items? No, not revenue. Okay, let's go to expenses.
Expenses. I'll go through what I'll call the bad news parts first. Legal services, we anticipate to be approximately $175,000 over budget. $175,000 over budget. Two primary things as far as that's concerned. On the train station effort, there were $115,000 of costs incurred there. We also, as this board is aware, have a number of pending tax appeals, both on the 2010 list, which are numerous, and some that have been filed recently within the last 30 days on the 2011 list. We are winding through courts, the courts, what I would say, with all deliberate speed. The new town attorney, Stanton Lesser, is working on some of these personally. Primarily, this is being handled by the law firm of Cohen and Wolf, and they've had some successes to date. A few cases have been settled. Others are scheduled for trial. Starting, I think the first trial is scheduled for August. But the fact of the matter is that we have incurred significant additional costs on the tax appeals.
Mr. Kiley?
If I may just digress here for a moment on legal, it's not specific to the current year budget, but it's a question in general about legal. We just went through the budget season, and when we went through the presentations on the legal services budget, which affect a lot of areas, right? It affects the legal budget itself, it potentially affects contingency, potentially could have an effect on surplus or reserves, or claims that we may have to pay. And, there's a lot of things going on there. There's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot of lawsuits, there's a lot of stuff. One of the questions that were asked, that was asked on March 20th was by Selectman Walsh. And the question was, has the town received any lawsuits of significance since January 1st of this year? Meaning, has anything happened of significance in the last couple of months that wouldn't have been in the budget book, but might have a meaningful impact on how we're looking at the legal budget or those other areas that lawsuits could affect? And the answer was no. We were told no. And it is also my understanding that 2 weeks prior to that, the town did receive a lawsuit on March 6th for about $5.4 million from Guerrera Construction on the train station. And I guess my question is, if that happened 2 weeks prior to that meeting and that question, why were we told no? I guess I'd ask Mr. Hiller, because you were the first one that we asked.
I would defer first, I think, to the first selectman if he
Okay,
wants to.
whoever can answer it. And my reason for asking is, the impact of a question like that or its response, in some cases, may have had an impact on how we viewed those areas of the budget or our potential spending. So I think I would have liked to have known that at that point in time.
Correct. One simple answer was that while we were talking about that, I was focused on town issues as opposed to the train, and I should have said, let us go check and let's get a complete list before answering that off the top of my head. So that's my fault for doing that, and I shouldn't have answered off the top of my head. Your question is two parts. Were there any more suits that came in? The answer obviously should have been yes. The question is, would any of those at that point have affected the legal reserve, which is part of what our conversation was, or at least as I remember it at the time? And we are kind of working through that it's a pending suit. I don't want to comment further than that, but it didn't have a major impact. At that point, we weren't making a major adjustment to any reserve for that until we had sorted it through.
Okay. I can understand that, and I can understand the fact that it may not have had an immediate known impact to a reserve, potentially even to a budget, but potentially it might have affected a budget. It just seems to me that, and I certainly accept your explanation, thank you, sir, but it certainly seems to me that that's information that this board should have had when we were deliberating those budgets, and, whether it was an oversight or something else, it does concern me that we weren't told, and I definitely wanted to bring it up and get a response. So
Yep.
thank you for
And I
the
take-
response.
I take full responsibility, and it's, again, to be fair in that, I should have gone back and said, let's get a list, we'll show you exactly what's come in since January 1st.
Okay.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is I feel, in my tenure here, we are probably at the one of the lowest points as far as, with the exception of that situation, which is kind of a standalone and unique situation, but as far as liability actions that the town is defended in, we are probably at one of the lowest points, if not the lowest point, as far as exposure at this time, and as that existed on March 20th. And I certainly, as the person who's signing off on the audit, am very comfortable with the reserves that we hold against those actions.
I'm not questioning the reserve, I'm just questioning the process, because it just, I'll just go back to my previous comment. It just, as far as I know, it was information that was known, and I believe firmly that's information that should have been shared with us. Thank you.
I want to follow up on that because, quite frankly, I was furious about it because we asked the question through Mr. Walsh 1 week before we voted. We were told very specifically there were no lawsuits filed. Then we came back in the night we were voting. There was a question asked by Mr. DeWitt after there was the surprise of the $1.5 million in the reserve, and Mr. DeWitt very specifically asked, is there any other, I don't remember the term of art that you used, but was there any other information that we did not have that we should have? And a $5.4 million lawsuit, I would say, qualifies, unless there's other $5.4 million lawsuits that I'm unaware of that make this just a run-of-the-mill. And the other item was, we left that meeting having voted on the legal budget, having voted on the contingency budget, and lo and behold, there was an article in the newspaper or an article on the website that night that was posted. So that just was not good. I thank you for bringing it up because I was furious about it.
Understandably.
That's a material change from what we were told, and it was material to our budget deliberations. And that was information I think, quite frankly, we should have had. And it was asked twice. So, I'm glad I had the opportunity to get that off my chest. So, anybody else have anything? Wish I could remember the term you used, Chris.
It's obviously brilliant. It was brilliant.
And memorable.
Can we go to the videotape, Jerry?
Yeah. Anything else on this? Anything else
No,
on legal?
I'm good. I just needed to get that off my chest. Thank you.
All right, that's it on legal. Heart and hypertension, Mr. Hill?
Heart and hypertension is another area which this board has become all too familiar with over the past several years. As you're aware, I believe this is the fourth year now in which this was moved out of the Internal Service Fund by the previous administration into the general fund as a separate line item. We are over budget as the calculation that we have on this, and this is with the caveat that there are no major pending settlements out there, which we never know, is that we would be 184,000 over budget for the end of the year. There are pending cases. We have no, or what I'll term very limited reliability as to when something might come, or when the Workers' Comp Commission might say, here's an award for past service or something like that might have occurred. And so the estimate is based on the remaining 3 months of service, of payments that seem to be structured, let's say. As you're aware, we have several widows that we're paying on a weekly basis, and those are known, and other ongoing costs. And so that total comes up to being just under 200,000 over budget on that. The last major item, which has begun to improve, is unemployment compensation. As this board's been aware for some time, we saw the unemployment issue going over budget early in the fiscal year. Approximately 70% of those costs are attributable to the Board of Education, and the reduction in their budget last year. The one good news that I would say is that it appears in the last 3 months now that the rate of payments there has slowed fairly dramatically. We were paying back in the fall just on regular benefits, and this does not include what are referred to as extended benefits. We were paying in excess of $25,000 for Board of Education former employees. That has slowed down so that the April payment, which is really the March bill for benefits received in February, that's the way it works, was just over $10,000 for the Board of Education. So we've gone from $25,000 a month to just over $10,000. So it has changed fairly dramatically in the last 90 days on that side. And the estimate, we've been able to lower our estimate as to where we're going to be over budget to approximately $150,000 over budget for the fiscal year on that category. And we think it's not going to get a lot better than that.
Any other
It'd
questions?
be a couple $1,000s better.
Just on heart and hypertension, so I understand this a little bit better. First of all, 2 individuals received permanency awards. What is a permanency award?
Permanency award is determined by well, it's adjudicated by the commissioner, and it's as a result of medical evidence that's presented that a person has impairment in their cardiovascular function by a certain percentage. And they're complicated things, and as a result of either a cardiac incident, developing hypertension, any other things that are related to the whole heart and hypertension situation. If someone has a heart attack, we have one police officer who has returned, thankfully, to light duty, but last fall had a very serious heart attack. That award has not come down yet. We're going to get an award, we're going to be liable for an award on this one. And we know that, you just don't know when. And so, and as you're aware, there's right now, there are no reserves. There are some liabilities that are carried for this, but the reserve is called the general fund. I mean, we have a budget line in the general fund for this. That has been increased by actions of this board for the coming year. And you don't know what incident might happen next, God forbid. But we've got approximately 200 active police and firefighters. We've got a number who were retired, and we're still liable for them on an ongoing basis, depending on, because they have filed prior to retirement, I forget the particular form that they file. And
Can anyone file for that? I mean, anyone that retired before they retired, they can just file?
where they retire, they file, and they say, that.
Based on, even if they're fine?
No, there has to be some medical evidence that, there has to be medical evidence in advance of it. In other words, you can't retire in perfect, excuse me, perfect health and 6 years later have a heart attack and say that it was related. There's got to be something on file prior to retirement. But we have, people who are retired who've appeared before this board, who are, the papers are in place in case anything happens, because there is some medical evidence of impairment of their cardiovascular function.
Okay, Mr. Brown? Any other questions? Any expense line?
Yes, please. Quick comment on transfers and adjustments. There appears to be 3 additions to capital outlay lines for police, human services, and golf courses to the tune of $65,000. Where did that come from? Yep. 36,000 for the police, 17 for human services, 12 for golf courses.
I'm looking at the human services line. I don't see any. Are you on page 7?
I think we may have addressed this the last time. Are you talking about the encumbrances or the carryovers
Nope.
from prior year? The
well,
36,000 in
I-
police department?
Oh, maybe I am.
That's what you're talking about. I think we already.
Page
I'm-
17.
Right, I'm just looking
Capital
at.
outlay.
I'm just looking at that one.
You're saying that's encumbered from last year?
It's
Or carried,
encumbered from the previous year,
From the
which was done
previous-
by action of
previous
this
year.
board in September.
right. And it probably has already been spent, but we reflected in that column.
So it wasn't spent in the prior year's budget? Just wasn't spent?
These are purchase
This is another
orders.
windfall
These
from
are
POs
No,
that we
no,
didn't
these are
execute?
purchase orders. They probably ordered that, I'm guessing by the number, might be a car. That was not, that was carried
Right, so like
forward to complete the purchase.
$12,000, there's something, or what was South Pine Creek now is Carl Dickman, a
You know,
pickup truck.
we have Schedule A, B, C, D, and it's listed on those schedules, but I don't happen to have it with me, those schedules tonight.
Can we follow up on that just to make sure that this
Right.
is something
Be
that was ordered
specific.
but not-
The golf course, on the golf courses, the $12,000, I'm 90% certain was for half a truck.
Right.
Well, there's yeah, right, okay.
We'll get
Well,
those.
what you're saying is this could have been things that were ordered that weren't received and therefore not paid for by the end
Well,
of
what
the
we
fiscal
did is
year.
we purchased in one year half a truck, and then
Right.
next year had the other half.
Right,
And so
in that
it was, these are purchasers. This is the type of thing that, for example, this is how Munis handles the purchase orders.
Let's just follow up on this as opposed to
We will.
guessing.
Right.
Let's just follow up.
We'll send you those schedules.
Great. Mr. DeWitt, any others?
No, that's it, thank you.
Anybody else? I've got one question on this, if I might. Just overall, in reading through the explanations, the highlights, are you comfortable now we're through March, almost through April, or halfway through April, more than halfway? Are you comfortable that the budget that's currently before the RTM that was passed by the board takes into account the items that we've seen through March? Is there any additional information that we didn't have that they should have to avail themselves of when they make their vote?
Nothing that I can think of. I think that this board and the First Selectman, Board of Selectmen has done a commendable job in particularly addressing some of the real shortfalls that we've had. You spend a great deal of time on things like workers' compensation, heart and hypertension that we just mentioned. We significantly, we've increased the unemployment compensation to what appears to be what we're going to spend this year to that line, and this board shaved that a little bit because we were seeing some improvement there. But on things like that, the budget that you've passed on to them, I think, very adequately addresses those things. In addition to what I'll call the supplemental items, again, relating to workers' comp, fund balance, and the pension fund.
So there's nothing new in this that was unknown at the time we made our vote,
No, I
or
think,
changes the perspective?
And I'll speak as an individual, which is difficult in my position to do that, but I think, I'm always concerned about the legal budget. You made some reductions in that budget. As I indicated, we have we have two major issues, one which I mentioned, which is the tax appeals. The other are the labor negotiations.
You weren't too concerned about it on March 20th.
I'm sitting here just laughing, saying.
Well,
All right.
I don't feel, I think my concern is that two things have happened. One, we don't have additional settlements on the labor front, and we are beginning to see, not an inordinate number, but additional appeals based on the 2011 grand list. And so we've probably added, in the last 10 days, 10 new appeals on real estate, and it's going to take, it's going to take money to defend those, and it's going to take time and money. Those are the ones off the 2010 list, which are very numerous, are an active process. I mean, the other ones, one was just filed today, and there's a time limit, which the clock is running on that. There's a 60-day time limit in which an appellant has the opportunity to file those appeals. But we had, I believe the number was approximately 170 real estate appeals, which is a high number.
Okay.
And
Mr. Tetro, same question to you. Anything that in these numbers that changes?
At the risk of answering off the top of my head again, as much as this board hasn't been meeting, we've had 5 meetings since we last met with the RTM, going through various subcommittees, going through each department, going in up until last night. And there's nothing significantly that comes to mind that wasn't addressed or new information that's come up. I don't remember us in front of any of those committees bringing up anything new. And I don't, so I'm, nothing significant from that point that I can remember from any of those sessions. Closest thing to new information is that we are meeting with Moody's on April 30th per their request. So on Monday, we'll be heading down to meet with them. Paul, you said that's per a recent regulation change, that they had to meet with us within 120 days.
We were trying to get scheduled with them for late June, frankly, and they said, oh, we've got to, they're claiming that there's and I've never seen it, but when someone is on negative outlook, and they claim it's an SEC regulation, they told Matt Spurndle, our financial advisor, that they have an internal whether it's SEC or what, that they're required to meet with us within 120 days of the issuance of our annual report, which in our case was approximately December 31st. And I had originally requested because, as I say, I think that what the administration and this board has done has put forth a very proactive budget, particularly in the areas that I've just addressed, workers' comp and fund balance and things of that nature. And I wanted to be able to go there after May 7th and say, this is what we've done. They're saying, no, we had to meet, and so the last possible date was, so we're going down there Monday morning. And I did say this, that, I did insist that we get senior personnel. And so we've got the co-director of the Northeast, along with the Connecticut analyst that we're going to be meeting with on Monday.
And that is, and the purpose of that meeting is?
The only good news is that it's on their dime. The second piece is, I believe they're requiring a review based on our current status with a negative outlook, based on a recently passed regulation for either the ACC or the National, SEC or the National, forgive me for not being clear on that. So they are requiring it. April 30th is in fact the last day within 120 days of when our financials were issued. Right. We are meeting with the other rating agencies towards the end of June, and because of the July 4th holiday and other days, in order to make sure that they get their review done before we go out for the bonding. To answer your other question, perhaps a little more fully, with a couple thoughts, thinking back to our recent comment, the contractor that filed the larger suit also filed a smaller suit recently for like $220,000. And then we are having some implementation discussions on the fire contract with the fire union, just to clarify how that would work.
Thank you.
Okay. I just don't, and forgive me, I just can't remember anything that's come up in the last couple of weeks at the moment beyond that.
Thank you. What else? Anything?
I think, one thing, as far as if you want to go back to the budget itself or the specifics, is that we've identified significant savings with several vacancies, several of which are in the process of have been filled or in the active process of being filled. Specifically, there's been a children's librarian hired. The vacancy position in purchasing has been filled. We have interviews scheduled for May 8th for the deputy assessor position. And so a lot of these, it's not that they're going to carry over deep into the fiscal year, right, but we're able to, in a sense, quantify a particular number, realizing that these vacancies have been out there for a period of time in many cases, but are actively being filled as we speak.
And we did not add to staff in the budget?
No.
Right.
No.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from board members? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Seeing none, thank you. We'll move on to the last item, which is to hear and review the current status of the town's pension plans as of March 31st. Mr. Hiller?
Mr. Malarkey left me a voicemail this afternoon that he unfortunately also had a business commitment and was unable to make it. I submitted, I don't know if you need copies of the so-called flash report. There's a much more significant report which Callan produces, and for the first time also, they have produced an OPEB report. The pension fund had modest gains during the third quarter and in the month of March. In advance of, I think, what will probably be some of Mr. Kiley's questions, the board has made three major decisions, two of which will be, one of which will be finalized on next Tuesday. We did sell yesterday $10 million worth of domestic fixed income securities from two managers, $5 million from Dwight, $5 million from Sykes. That is going into a $10 million commitment going into a private equity, I'm sorry, going into a real estate fund managed by Principal Financial. The other two investments that the board has voted on are to an $8.5 million commitment in commodities, which should be completed by May 15th, primarily coming out of the overweight status in domestic equity, where we are some roughly 10% over target as far as that. And that $8.5 million will be going into commodities. There is a, recently, just within the past 3 weeks, I guess, on the 27th of March, the board committed $20 million in private equity for our second commitment there to Mesero Financial Services. That commitment will probably be fully funded. I shouldn't say, well, that will not be fully funded because the $20 million will be committed and they will call on that as invested by June 1st. And then the board also, at a meeting last week, had a presentation from Callan on hedge fund of funds and are moving forward with, probably at the June meeting, with reviewing that. The board will meet next on the 15th of May and are reviewing the two fixed income managers, Sykes and Dwight. Dwight has recently been sold to Goldman Sachs Asset Management, and staff from Goldman Sachs will be at the May 15th meeting. Callan has had expressed some concerns on that whole transition, frankly, and so there may be some changes made there, but they're not imminent.
Questions, comments from board members? Mr. Kiley?
Thank you,
And
Mr.
then I go to
Chairman.
Mr. Bolito.
Just a quick one, Paul. If you don't have it tonight, tomorrow's fine. Can you just get us the name of the new private equity firm or private equity investment group that we're putting the $20 million into?
The private equity firm is sponsored by Mesero Financial, MESIROW.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr.
Nope.
Kiley? Mr. Bolito?
We had a search with 3 firms. Actually, we had a search that was originally, they solicited 14 firms. We had responses from 11. That was shortlisted down to 4, then 1 was eliminated. And we interviewed Adams Street Partners out of Chicago, Mesero Financial out of Chicago, and Portfolio Advisors out of Darien.
Thank you.
And the committee, by majority vote, selected Mesero Financial.
Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hiller, on page 3 of the first report you gave us, the on the pension, not the OPEB, the total fund returns, investment manager returns, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. Is that the rate of return on the entire pension fund over these different time periods, or
It
is that a
is-
different animal?
One of the difficulties, and I've been working with Callan, it is on the entire pension fund.
Okay.
As far as, if you look at the bottom line, the last 12 months is 3.92.
Right.
I think the
Where is
one
that,
thing that I've
Mr.
been working with Callan on, because if we were to have closed business on March 31st and had our actuaries go in and get something, what this does not reflect, and so there's been a, you know, we pay out approximately 1.35, $1.4 million in benefit payments monthly. So that has come out of this period, out of this thing. So if you take, so what I'm saying is, our assets have been reduced, in essence,
Because of payouts.
because of payouts for a 9-month period. We've made 9 months of, or depending on which time frame you look at it. What Callan is looking at is how they can better reflect, because those payouts are having a negative impact on our return. And so
Right.
our return in reality for the last 12 months was better than 3.92%.
Okay, I got that.
Because what all they're looking at is I had so many dollars in assets on April 1st of last year, and on March 31st, I had this. But, you know, we paid out $12 million or $13 million over that period of time. And that's the thing that we're trying to have them reflect here better so that it gives a little more, what I'll term, actuarial accuracy.
Right. That actually leads to my next
Fun to say.
question. When the actuaries give us the rate of return that we're working on as an assumption, from what you're telling me, they are not factoring in payouts.
This isn't, the actuaries are.
They are, okay.
Because the actuaries, the 7.5% figures, you know,
Right.
that you have that. And so if you were to look at it and you were
It's actually
add that,
7.75%.
I'm sorry?
7.75%.
7.75%. But if you were to add back those benefit payments that we made over this period of
Right.
time, we'd be pretty close to that number.
Okay. The other thing that just kind of jumps out at me, even giving what you're saying about the fact that the payouts aren't adequately or accurately reflected or reported here, is you look at the last 12 months, you're looking at 3.92. Again, you would adjust upwards to reflect the payouts. And then you look at the last 36 months, you're like, oh, we're doing great. And then you look at the last 60 months, it's like, oh my God, it's 1.31%. Now, even, you know, factoring it upwards for the payouts, that's nowhere near where we want to be. Now, granted, that includes some pretty bad stock market times.
You sound like you're coming out of the Brackfield School.
I guess so. Been hanging around with that guy too much. You know, ball guys stick together, right? So
He's not here, so I can pick on him.
absolutely, go right ahead.
He'll watch the tape.
Yeah, he will. I can tell you that. He needs to get out more. But anyway, so it's all over the place, and it just makes me concerned or a little anxious about, all right, are we really pegging the right amount actuarially in terms of how we're contributing when you have this much of a variance, understanding the stock market goes up and down, but I mean, this is like all over the place.
Well, you know, and this is not you know, it is all over the place. And you see, I mean, and that 36-month and 60-month column really shows it dramatically. That 24-month span also was probably the most dramatic economic times that we've gone through in our lifetimes. You know, hopefully we don't revisit that. But that's where it is.
But then you look at last month even, and that's hovering around 1%. So, you know, again, even just if you take a smaller snapshot, it's still very volatile. You know,
Clearly,
certainly
yeah.
something to keep an eye on.
You know, I think what they would tell you is, you know, we're in this for the long haul. We're not in it for 60 months, but, you know, we're looking at 20-year liabilities. We're looking at a lifetime of benefit payments. And these are some of the things that, you know, the pension board is weighing very proactively, really.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Just some clarification. The actuaries do consider the payouts when they're looking at the rate of return?
Yes.
So even with the rate, even with the payouts, they're still looking for 7.7, they're still considering 7.7?
No, with the 7.75 is before the payouts. In other words, if we went in, if we went into the year,
Actual adjusted for the payouts.
if we went into the
is-
year with 300 million,
This doesn't take into
assets.
account the payouts.
what they're
This
saying
is
is
just
we've got to
dollar.
earn 7.75 on that 300 million, and then deduct and the primary costs that we have. Obviously, there's a lot of other costs that go with this, the cost of the actuaries, the cost of the advisors, Callan.
So you're saying that this 1.31% would be close to 7.75% without the payouts?
Where's the one in the
The last 5 years?
60 months.
the 1.31? On that one, you're probably low, because what I'm saying is, and I think the easiest way to look at it 7.75%, if we had 300 million, if we wound up the year at 300 million, what we're saying is we have to earn 7.75% on that gross. So we've got to earn $23 million roughly, and then take the payments out of it.
Did we do that?
Yeah, we're probably there right now. If we close shop today, we're probably there, yeah. We certainly did last year, because we were 22.
I think the answer is, instead of doing the, cocktail napkin math, ask Callan to
Yeah.
revisit these assumptions and do it the right way. Because to Mr. Bolito's point, this is scary and just basically says to me that when we put the money back in under the do no harm point of view, I'm comfortable with that decision right now. And, until I see anything that's better information other than saying, well, if we do this or do that. The other scary number that we haven't even got to yet, and my apologies, Mr. Brown, if you'll allow me, is if you look to the OPEB number, right? Is this being actively managed at this point in time, or is this just kind of
It
sitting
is
to
being,
the side?
it is being actively managed. For the first time, and this is the first time this report was distributed last month
Right.
to the board.
So the pension board is now actively managing?
So they are
actively
and what is, when you say it's actively managed, these, both funds, the 11.5 million essentially, 11.4 million, that is held in those funds, are actively managed in fixed income investments.
Okay, let me ask,
Have,
there are fixed income investments right now in this?
that is correct.
That's where this all is fixed income?
It is 100% in those investments.
Okay.
What we've
So
asked Callan to do,
Mm-hmm.
because we have the opportunity, and the state statute on this is far more restrictive
Mm-hmm.
on these funds, as we're able to invest up to 60% into equities,
Mm-hmm.
and the other 40% into fixed income,
Let me ask a question then. What is the rate of return on the actual analysis?
7.5,
It's 7.5. Okay.
right.
So it's 7.5 and more restrictive.
Yeah, and I think, and the comment to the board, that the board made at that time, though if you look at it, we essentially, in the last 12 months, have been close to that,
Right.
7.35.
And
But-
since inception, we're at,
Since inception, we're at 4.77.
right.
Now, that assumption's only since 2009, but we're under that, and it is,
So
we've had a
36
good year. We've had a good
36
year as far
months.
as fixed income is concerned here.
Right, but in
What
the same
What the board
time,
is not able to sustain, I think, is we're not going to be able to sustain 7.5% by staying totally in fixed income. And so what we've asked Callan to do is to go back and say, okay, within the statute, and as particularly as this board now goes to full funding next year on the ARCA for OPEB, what other options should we be going into? Now, it's going to be difficult to, because you don't have sufficient funds to get into specifically managed accounts as the pension fund is. But should we be putting these into a mutual fund or some other vehicle similar to that? And looking for advice from Callan as far as that.
so the pension board is actively engaged in those discussions at this point?
Started to. And it's going to be the pension board meets the third Tuesday of every month, and which I think is a big improvement over the past, frankly, haphazard schedule on that. And we intend to make the OPEB discussion a monthly item.
Good. Yeah, because it's, I mean, it certainly would tell you that we're not hitting our actuarial assumptions at the present time on the OPEB side. And we knew we were not funded where we need to be, and you combine the not funded with the not hitting the rate of return, and you're just digging a bigger hole. Right.
And this is the year, because under GASB 43 and 45,
Right.
we were only required for biannual review of that. This is the year we're going to be getting that as of July 1st.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Brown, are you all set? Okay. Anybody else? All right. That was the last item on our agenda for the evening. One programming note that I wanted to make, because there's been some confusion, or at least I've heard some, as I would call it, static on the channel over this. There was some discussion over the library board coming to this board regarding the Fairfield Woods branch and some of their desires regarding options related to the physical plant. And if anybody's been in that physical plant, you can obviously see that it's well-worn, shall we say, and certainly has some structural issues. There was some discussion over whether the library board should come before our board, as they had with the Board of Selectmen, and discuss all these options. And there was some confusion. I've heard some notes saying, well, the Board of Finance actually took us off the agenda and things, or took the library off the agenda. And quite frankly, I just wanted to clarify that. The library board was not on the agenda, so they weren't taken off the agenda. The First Selectman is exploring a new process related to getting the boards up to speed on these potential projects that may come down the pike. We talked as a board, and or I spoke individually with board members, and thought that if we opened it up and had one presentation from the library board about a sense of options, then it would really set a precedent where we would have to hear from the many other boards and commissions as they came forward with their set of options for whatever they were deliberating. Before, quite frankly, it was pushed forward by the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen had voted on it and decided what their pleasure was on the item. And I didn't think, and I don't think other members of this board thought, that that was a good precedent to set. So we decided that it was not going to be on our agenda, but that was without prejudice. That was without saying that we've taken a view on it, just that the item is not before us for deliberation, because quite frankly, we don't know what we're deliberating, because we don't know what the Board of Selectmen has passed on. So that's why that's not here right now. That being said, my understanding is the library board, I think, and I'll defer to the Board of Selectmen members, I think they're asking, or the thought was, at least as explained to me, that they'd like to form a building committee. And again, that doesn't come before us unless they're actually asking for funding for that committee. But I think that was their intent, was to ask for a building committee. I wanted to clarify that because I didn't want it misinterpreted as to our actions on this item, or anyone thinking that we had made some deliberation or some discussion as to the validity of the item itself, or that we had unilaterally taken something off an agenda. This is a change in our regular process that's being explored. Mr. Tetra and I did have a nice discussion about it, about perhaps a written report or something like that. And I want to commend the First Selectman on wanting to improve the communications between the boards on this item, because I think that's important. So, Mr. Tetra, you have something you want to say?
Yeah, that the concept was, it has been mentioned from time to time by this board, certainly by me when I was a member of this board, but I wasn't the only one to say it. And certainly at the RTM, you hear it very often, which is, how come we're just hearing about this now?
Right.
How come we didn't know about this sooner? How come we're being asked to make a decision on such short notice, all in one night, what's taking place? So the thought process was simple. For some of the more major projects, get the presentation out in front so there's time to identify the questions, potentially enhance the presentation for when it comes back, but so you're not getting the presentation at the same time you're getting a request for funds.
Right.
That's all.
Yep.
And to the extent that that would help raise the visibility, give not only this board, but the RTM, the Board of Selectmen, more time to think about things before having to make a decision on it. That was all.
Right. And I appreciate that. I think that's a noble goal that we should all strive to achieve. Mr. Polito.
It's a good idea. The only thing I would say is that I do believe we have at least some mechanism in place to do that, which is the 5-year capital planning workshop, where we get a sheet of paper with, here's what's coming down the pike over the next 5 years. Understanding it's not, all-inclusive, there are things that do come up. My concern is that essentially it does open the door and it creates that slippery slope where is every capital project of any significance going to be coming to us for essentially a pretrial, and then goes back, and then we get it again as, something that we vote on. I think that, again, we're all volunteers, not Mr. Tetro anymore, but we're all volunteers here, and our time is limited. I mean, there's only so much time we have to consider the voting items we have, much less, get kind of a preview in any great detail. So, while I think it's a good idea to explore, I think we got to be cautious about opening that door, because then it's like, where do you draw the line? Is it a dollar amount? Is it, certain needs or certain departments that we only consider, and it's got to be dealt with very carefully, I think, going forward. So I would just throw that comment out there.
I agree with you.
Yeah, no question. And if you think back to the last presentation you had from the library on their space needs, their physical plant, what's taken place, it goes back quite a few years. So this was a chance to get an update not only on that project, but frankly on questions like what's a branch versus what's the main office, what's your strategy in terms of where they should be. And if it happens early enough, address questions like, is this the right location? All right, because there's two issues. Is the project worthwhile? Is this where we should be? Should we be investing this much in a library function? But then step back, is this the right locale? Do we want to invest this much money to build this library in this space for the next 20, 30 years, given everything else that's happening around that? If we don't get some of those things out, to Mr. DeWitt's point, annual point, I guess, at this point, we're not buying any land. Well, if we know we need space for a library, perhaps when that land buy comes by, that can be one of the things that gets captured. There's certainly some land issues that we've passed on over time. That looking back, if we knew we had certain needs, we might have, and I'm not sure we'd actually make the purchase for that, but I'd say that we should have had the discussion. And I think we missed that opportunity. So it's a question of looking at the process. We have a kind of a linear decision process. And simply, in most businesses I've been involved in, that's not a good model. We try to get more of an iterative process where you take a couple more shots at it. I mean, if you look at technology, that's really what CAD/CAM did for the design process. It lets you get a lot more cycles. The first thought when you look at a computer-aided design thing is, hey, that lets us get through it quicker. When you look at the process and see when it actually happens, it doesn't. What it lets you do is improve the quality of the design because you get so many more iterations on it. You're still up all night the night before, printing it out, getting it on a plane, and getting it out to your client. But you come out with a much better design and much better. And I looked at this as an opportunity to take a look at the decision process. So I certainly didn't mean to ask any of the boards or volunteers here to do more work than they already do. You guys put in a tremendous number of hours.
Mr. DeWitt. Thank you, Mr. Tetro.
I have to agree with Mr. Polito. I mean, the first selectman, much to his credit, has implemented our long-term capital plan. We have a dedicated date for it every year, and I think that's a better place to, because I'm looking at, and I don't know how old this one is, but Fairfield Woods Library upgrade was a $5.5 million funding request here. I've only heard rumors that it was 11 million when they came to you. I don't know what the number is. I don't want to quote numbers.
You just did.
Well, I did, yeah, right. Formally.
We promise not to quote you, though.
Yeah, right. But this seems like a better venue for conveying that kind of information, because when we talked, Mr. Chairman, I got the impression we would not take a sense of the body vote.
Right.
It wouldn't like we would all say, hey, this sounds like a good idea, let's all vote on it. No, this was just going to be a one-way conversation, a couple quick questions, and we would,
Well, it would give you the opportunity to voice any concerns, as it typically happens, and we can pick a lot of what I'll call the poster child examples of this, or certainly at the RTM, where it's like, hey, we want more detail here, we want more detail there. When I look at Riverfield coming through the Board of Selectmen, we asked a host of questions up front before we put together the build committee or did some other things there. So, and certainly as projects come through from the ward roof to the roof warranty to other things, the request is continually for additional information. So the thought was, is there another way to get that information out a little bit sooner? That's
Yeah.
all.
I mean,
I-
but that is our process, right? Our process is,
Is linear.
bunch of data comes to the Board of Selectmen. You're the first wicket. You ask the big hard questions. Comes here, we ask the second round of big hard questions. Then the RTM gets to ask the third round of big hard questions, right? So, hopefully, we know what you've asked and we don't have to answer the same questions, right? It's,
Yeah, and see, I'd argue as it goes through each step, no, that doesn't happen, because you don't get to see our minutes, you don't get to see our meetings, so you don't know what we asked.
I
And
watch
and
your
what
meetings
we
all the time.
Okay, well, not everybody does, all right. If you go through the RTM, you hear a lot of the same questions that were asked here.
Oh, okay,
Because-
I agree with you there.
And the other thing, having sat on all three boards, I've also observed over time that sometimes you get different flavors of information. And as the questions get answered, things that we didn't ask or weren't fully. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I do think, well, that's noble, and I think that's right, and I agree with the kind of the nonlinear process. I do think you do need that funnel at the beginning, which is the Board of Selectmen. And I think the reason those bodies are actually paid bodies, is a paid body, is because that's supposed to be the filter that says, here's what we're willing to commit and what we want the rest of the boards to actually look at. Because the other side of the equation is, you could have this board and then the RTM reviewing a project that's never going to reach them. And you've just wasted their time. Because if the flavor of the Board of Selectmen is that they're not going to advocate or approve the project going forward in one form or another, then you've just had 70 other people waste their time listening to a project that's never going to get through door number one. So that's, I agree with the concept of we need to give people a heads up that something's on the plate and something's coming. And to Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Polito's point, maybe that is the capital planning. I do think, and particularly you hear this a lot from the RTM, that they feel rushed, that they need to make a decision at a given point in time. So, quite frankly, something that the Board of Education does, where you hear a presentation 1 month, right, and then you actually vote on it. I don't think they actually go month to month, do they? They go like bi-weekly, right? Is how
It's
they do it.
bi-weekly, but I think they only vote on those things month to month. I don't think, they have different focuses for those
They
two
have different
agendas.
focus. But that's always, I thought, been a pretty good model,
Well,
quite
that's
frankly.
the planning and zoning model,
Yeah,
all right.
which for these big projects, I think is quite good.
All right, so that, and that was all. And just the issue with the capital planning workshop is because those are all just one-line item things, we don't get a presentation on what that
Right.
is. So,
But no one should be surprised that this topic has come up. Do you know what I'm saying?
And I mean, we can get, I'm an advocate of, I'd take a capital plan adjustment every month via email, and, so maybe it comes next month and that number's changed to something that's not 5.5. We only have the big meeting
Maybe it's
once a year.
quarterly.
Maybe it's
see,
quarterly.
but it's
right.
not the number that's going to change in that sense. It's not, because until you hire the architect, until you do the design, until you go and approve it, there is no final number, and there's not.
Right.
But we know it's not that number now. Oh, I guess we don't.
So,
But see, that's always my problem with that one piece of paper. That should be a budget. So if we think the budget should be 10, that number should be 12. It shouldn't be 5 if we think it's 10. It should be more.
With the capital plan, you're never going to, and I guess this is where we should get into the capital planning workshop at some point, but we're trying to move away from that, at least I am, in the sense that if you sit here and say this project's going to be $11 million, you're wrong. I mean, it's not, you can't pick one number out before you've hired the architect, done the design, and laid everything out. It just doesn't.
yeah.
If you go high, folks get all panicked. If you go low, then you're accused of lowballing it, and it's, how come we're always, coming up, doubling our budget before we even get to our deal? So you're never going to be right on that. I think that what we tried to start last year, and hopefully we'll take another step forward this year, is say, let's look at the capital plan in terms of how much bonding do we want to have, what debt service do we want to commit to,
right.
and then let's look at how many, much like you would
That's
load
what you
up
have to do.
a manufacturing machine that can make 120 widgets a day.
Right.
How many projects can we get done for this overall number?
Right.
Then within that, which priority do you want to have? In any event, a bad project shouldn't get approved. If it's too big, it should get cut back, and that's a project level, independent of what your debt service or overall bond targets are. Because as we discussed in the last capital workshop, at some point, we need to see this debt service number come down.
Yep.
So the question is, how soon can we start that trending down? But you don't want to have it trend down just because you have an approved project, so you know they're going to, so we try to put that allocation in to say, yeah, here's a certain amount of money we know, we're planning on spending, just so it fills out the waterfall, so we don't think we're in better shape than we are.
No, agree.
Any other questions, comments? It's a topic we'll revisit, and we'll try to work on a process that makes sure everybody is communicated, and also that we're cognizant of the amount we're trying to put through the quote-unquote funnel. Mr. Hiller, do we have anything?
One reminder to the board, normally this board meets on the first Tuesday of the month. Due to the fact that the first Tuesday of the month is May 1st and the RTM will not have acted on the budget, we are scheduled for May 8th, which is 2 weeks from tonight, and which time we will, on the assumption that the RTM hands a budget over to us, we will have to vote on the 8th on the tax rate. The other items we discussed briefly are the appointment of an auditor.
Are we
And-
doing that here, or is that going to be down at the library?
It's going to be here. Because the Board of Ed was scheduled here, but they are, it's an awards night, and they're going to be elsewhere. I think they're at one of the high schools.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Seeing none, do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Second, Mr. Witt. All in favor? Opposed, abstentions? Thank you, everybody. Thanks for a good meeting. Good night.